So I want to thank everyone for joining today. We have several sessions. We started probably early spring. Just a little bit of background on what we usually cover. So most of the time we present from a technical perspective. We always participate in the local Microsoft events. We also, as you know, we host a lot of the webinars. We were focused mainly on a technical webinars, for lack of a better description. We made some adjustments in the spring to focus more on the business as a whole. So helping to make business decisions, whether it's around records management, process automation, moving content from one platform to another. So the fall sessions we're doing now, this is number 2. What we decided to do is make some more adjustments, and we're inviting some of our partners along. We felt as though that would give us a little bit broader feedback when we're sharing information with our end users and our customer base. So in early October, we had an Intex along to talk a little bit about paper and going to an automated environment. This session, we have ShareGate coming along. I'll do that introduction in just a couple minutes there. Yeah, let's go ahead and start. So we have 3 people total. We have myself, I'm the Director of Operations with DocPoint. We have Charles Savaria, who is with ShareGate. He's going to share some of his expertise and some of his experiences that he's seen from working with their customer base directly. John Burgess is joining us from the sales team with DocPoint. John and I work out of the Maryland office, and we're glad to be on here. So we're looking forward to a great creative session. So today's November 6th. What's great about that? It's the day after the 5th, and we're back to seasonal commercials. So we're looking forward to that. Getting started here real soon. And for you sports fans, I'm going to give Mr. Burgess the first crack at this. What happened in 1995 on November 6th? That would be Art Modell announced the moving of the Cleveland Browns to Baltimore, who obviously became the Ravens. So there's a little tidbit of information for you. We want to
well done from a Commanders fan.
That's going to cause some controversy, I'm sure, somewhere along the lines too. But just something to pass along there. One other one today is National Nacho Day. So following Taco Tuesday, we're on National Nacho Day. Nacho Day, not to be confused with Queso Day, which is September 20th. So anyway, a couple of trivia questions there for you. We can go ahead and get started now. Just sharing a little bit about what DocPoint is. So we are part of the Konica Minolta family. DocPoint and Quality Associates complement each other. DocPoint works a lot in the 365 space. So we work a lot, obviously, with migrations. That's why we're here today. We also work in the forms workflow automation space, as well as custom development. We are complemented by our Quality Associates team, who works a lot on the digital conversion space. So getting all those items, those records or content scanned into your cloud platform, how do you get those moved into your cloud platform? That's a little bit what we're going to talk about today. So all of our teams complement each other very well, especially under this Konica Minolta umbrella. All right, logistics and housekeeping. So we usually keep these sessions to about 35 to 40 minutes. As I say in all the webinars, that's my attention span. You will receive a link to the recording after the webinar. If you look in your resources tab in the viewer screen under speakers and documents, you should see a PDF there, which is sort of a little handoff, a one-page handout. If you don't get that, let us know. We will send that to you. We love questions, so please use the Q&A as we're going through these sessions. We'll pause from time to time to answer those questions for you. And we do get some questions sometimes through our chat applications. We'll share those with you as well. Some of those are directly with some of our current customers. As I mentioned, in the Q&A, if you see something you want to compliment or you feel you can answer or vote it up, you can do that under your Q&A tab. Time permitting, we will answer all your questions. If we can't, like I mentioned, we will get back to you as soon as we can. All right, so let's get started here. So what are we going to cover today? So we have 4 bullets here. talking about alignment, migration goals with business outcomes, collaboration, making sure everyone's involved in this process, optimizing processes and workflows during the migration. We're going to talk about how to accelerate that in some capacity, and also how to handle workflows as a whole. There's a lot to that that can become rather involved. User adoption, we are really big on user adoption and training. So making sure that what is in your statement of work is what the users need. We don't want to be handing something off that the users have never seen. And one of the comments I have in here to make sure I note is that this is really about making sure everyone is on the same page, managing our customers' expectations, and making sure we have a good, solid statement of work. We want to avoid in migrations that to be determined feature, which is very common. We just see such a huge risk there, and also a lot of scope creep. So that can be anything from what you're going to use for a workflow solution post-migration or during migration, to even branding. Branding can become it can expand very quickly. So we always want to make sure we have those things nailed down in the statement of work.
Yeah.
All right, let's go and get started here. So John and Charles, again, thank you for joining, and thank you to our audience for joining this session as well. We know you are all busy. So what are we talking about today? Multiple sources of data. So we're talking about migrations and trying to use that 365 stack. There's just all kinds of different ways that content can come to us. It's not just a SharePoint to SharePoint. It's not just, another platform to another platform. There's all kinds of things. So, John, maybe I'll start with you. We're working on a couple items. We have a pilot project. One's around open text. One's around actually our QAI team doing some conversion work, scanning some content which is being loaded. Maybe you can share a little bit about those two projects there. I think you're on mute there, John. Sorry.
Yeah, I think, Scott, when people think of migrations, oftentimes they only think about, data moving either from another platform to 365. But oftentimes we're seeing that there's also shared drives, scary enough, they're still out there holding a lot of data. And that needs to be migrated, right? And you mentioned QAI. There's oftentimes we get in these migrations and organizations realize that they've got paper that is sitting there, right, on shelves and filing cabinets. So that's the complement of those two businesses. We're able to scan those documents and create whether it's a PDF or a TIFF or whatever format is needed, and migrate that over as well. So we're doing a lot of projects like that. It may start out as one scope, but it can sometimes change. And a lot of that is determined, in our analysis or assessment phase.
Perfect. Yeah, there's so many different ways and so many different sources this data comes from. I'm hearing little in-betweens. I jotted down the word governance. We're going to talk about that later. But Charles, from your side, you work directly with customers as well. There's all kinds of different platforms we move from. Maybe you can share a little bit of your experience and some of the challenges you've had, or just overall, just some feedback for our attendees.
Of course. Well, the drivers of migrations are very different, and a lot of them come from mergers and acquisitions. And what we see sometimes is like, okay, we're buying this company and we're finding out during the assessment, one of those earlier stages, that, oh, they have this system. Oh, they still have these old file shares that they didn't use, but they didn't want to get rid of because of different rules and regulations and, audit reasons. And they're discovering as part of their project that they're going to have to maybe learn about a system because they need to bring it into Microsoft 365. So, you have the common ones there. ShareGate is, focusing on SharePoint 365, Exchange, but we're also supporting file shares. We're doing Google Drives. We're able to bring this content over to Microsoft 365 to help consolidate. But yes, indeed, often people find out as they tackle the migration that there are external sources that they didn't account for, and the migration becomes more than just, oh, we need to do a SharePoint migration. It's a systems migration, and it is getting all of that content in the right way, in the right place within the target environment now.
Exactly, exactly. And there's so many things that go into this. We're going to talk about those as we move through our slides here. There's different tools to do this. We'll talk about that as well. Some built-in features that are available in 365. Does it usually meet the needs? Not always. And then there's not just direct migration. Sometimes we have the ability to go right from one platform to another in some cases. Sometimes it's multi-step. We have to export from one environment, reformat that data, maybe there's CSV files, and then prep it for upload into a 365 environment. So it's not always a one-to-one, and there's different tools to do that as well. So
Right.
sometimes getting that data out is a bigger challenge in some cases, but
Well, because data integrity is really important. So getting it out of somewhere just in a temporary stage or location before it moves somewhere else, you have to be careful. You don't want this, data, all your timestamps to become the ones of when you exported that out of that other source that you're not keeping. And everything, exported to a file share becomes downloaded today, and that's your created date. Well, no, it was created 5 years ago by someone else. So that's another challenge. Data integrity, if you end up with like steps in your migration, can definitely be a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. It just, we could talk about this for 3 or 4 days, actually.
We could
But
have
we're
this
not gonna do
webinar for a week.
Exactly. So I think we touched on part of the online to online, so acquisition. So this is something we originally had into the previous slide, but we kind of separated this out. So when we see the online to online types of business challenges there, moving that data, where do you usually see that? We have acquisitions, mergers noted here, but share a little bit about your experience with that, Charles.
Well, again, there's different usage, different ways of using, Microsoft 365 and the SharePoint Online environment and other connected services provide organizations with different ways of working. And when you end up having to consolidate two environments that didn't work the same way, didn't use labels the same with the same intention, didn't uh, build their information architecture with the same priorities, and making sure that those are aligned so that it's really optimal for the end user experience once the migration is complete is also one of the other challenges, because then you have to find out what's the best way for one, what's the best the best way for the other, find the middle ground, and then get everybody else on board. You mentioned it before, we're going to mention it again. End user adoption in the migration process becomes critical. You're making this basically for people to be able to do their best work. Let's make sure that there's a common definition of what that is. And you have other considerations. We have governance, we have security and compliance. Maybe these rules on one place were not the same on the other. How do you find that middle ground? And that's going to be involving business stakeholders, so many different, I guess, interviews and interactions that you're going to have to really know exactly how do you plan your migration, what's your design, and how do you validate that this was a successful project down the line. So yeah,
Excellent, excellent.
challenges all over.
Yeah, for sure. And I know John and I have seen these types of engagements a lot of times, especially when you're doing mergers, acquisitions, have a really, really short timeline. We've had the request of just move it. We'll worry about the rest later. We have to get it moved from one business to another. That usually turns into, you're not moving that here to our environment. It's going to have to be restructured. But there's a big push there, and sometimes obviously that introduces a lot of risk. So we always want to be aware of that for sure.
Yeah. And I'd like to just reiterate what you said, Charles, and Scott, certainly in those acquisition and mergers, sometimes it's just a lift and shift. Other migrations, it's extremely important. You mentioned planning, right? Planning is so important, especially for the back end. When we talk to our customers, we ask them, what is your business outcomes? What are those desired outcomes you're looking for? Security requirements. All of these needs and requirements need to be understood, and we typically do that in the assessment and analysis phase. So it's so important because at the end of the day, you want your end users to be able to access what they're looking for in a way that makes sense to them. And if we don't plan for it up front, then we're making assumptions that could hurt the back end of the business.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great comment. But it is amazing to see how different these migrations can be. We've had some that are very, very complicated, and then some also that are just very, very easy. So we never know how to handle this, but it's all about analysis. We go back to the same thing over and over again, making sure we understand those needs. Just as a quick note, we do have some polling questions I'll set up in a minute. It's only 2 questions. We'd appreciate a little bit of input that helps us to gather more information about future webinars and other presentation ideas. So I'll launch that here in just a second. All right. So our next subject, well, here it is. We talk about this all the time. You know, John, I know you and Charles chatted about this before. I think this is another one we could have a 1-week webinar on. The governance and prep. So John, you want to intro this one?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it goes back to, we can cover so much, right? Because there's a lot to it. But this is one area that, and Charles, I talked about it for a while, but, it's, we talk about cleanup, we can't cover everything in this session, but, when it comes to governance and data readiness, from your lens, what does that mean?
Again, it's probably a lot of things, but what you have to keep in mind, if in the light of a migration, well, how is this data going to be used? Who should have access to this data? What are the security and compliance rules that existed on the source that you have to keep in mind before you actually move this over? How do you, or what do you need to maybe configure on your target to realign with these security and compliance, let's call them rules or policies that you had in place as well? And make sure that you have a good understanding, or that the end users and the customer really has a good direction on what they want to do with this, and what are those different regulations and privacy policies, and there's so many different layers of security that need to be in place so that your data remains secure and remains available to the right people. What you're seeing on that screen is something that ShareGate has that's called Protect. It's about, governance, automating validation of when teams become inactive or SharePoint sites become inactive, so that, you could ask the owners, what should we do with this? Because if it's not used, it might no longer be relevant. If it's not relevant, maybe it should go to an archive and not be made available for, daily usage, because you want, again, to keep your data relevant, aligned with your objectives, and secure. So governance is really important even before you start your migration. It's probably even more important as you bring all of this information to a new environment, where you kind of have to renew and rethink probably your governance to make sure that everything is fully aligned.
Yeah. And it's all about cleaning up, right? Clean up before you move that data. It's hard to do. It is not easy. I think a lot of times that's something that we ask for. We've seen reductions up to 60% when we get this data ready before we move it. If you don't need it, don't move it. We're just creating a bigger issue down the road. That can even be accountability. We're not sure what's in there. Clean it up before you move it. It'll be worth. It's definitely worth to do that ahead of time.
Yeah, we're going to mention it in the next slide. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
No, I'm saying just to, I'm the least technical of the 3 of us here. So to dumb it down, when you're moving, you don't clean your garage out and take everything with you and put it back in the new garage, right? That just doesn't make sense. Some of it, might go to a storage unit, and sometimes some of it goes in the trash.
Good point.
100%. Yeah, I like the way you put it. That's the best way, I think, to say it right now. Maybe stuff does it need to be migrated? Or if it does it really need to be available in the same way the rest of the data is? Maybe you want to attach, there are new features in Microsoft 365 Archive that you can connect to a SharePoint site so that when it reaches its storage allocation, it goes to an archive that's going to be, less costly for you to maintain information. It's going to be available. It's still there, but it's not really within, what's available for all of your end users. So maybe before the migration, you split some of the documentation of the data into essentials, archive, or to be deleted, and this way you will have, well, we're talking about accelerating, optimizing, succeeding in your migrations. Well, if you know that you're removing 25% of the data that won't need to be migrated, well, you're saving yourself 25% of the job probably. You're going to accelerate your migration by only keeping what's relevant. Obviously, I've heard this for, it's been 8 years at ShareGate. I did support, I did customer success, helping people understand how the tool works. I now work with our channel partners. So I really have heard a lot of different scenarios. And what I've been hearing in terms of preparation also is why, get champions ahead of time within the different business units. They're the ones that know what's relevant, what should work, what should be improved upon. And that's how you can get the business stakeholders to align your project, and mostly to do that have, I guess, that bigger part of the cleanup. They're the ones who know, like, once again, what's really relevant or not, and can help you or the whoever's managing the migration project to limit the scope and only keep what's relevant for the migration project. It's going to make easier for the migrator or migrators if there's a few of them, and it's going to make sure that what you bring into the final destination is, once again, what's really relevant and is valuable for the end users. You're doing this for them. It's about employee productivity. You want your organization to be able to do what they need and find what they are looking for quickly and efficiently.
Great points. Great points. I marked down the word and circled it, archiving data. We're going to talk about that towards the end. It's actually another session we have planned in December. I'll save that for the end. That's a really great point, Charles. So before we move to the next slide, we have one question that came in through our other chat. How do you handle the TBDs in a migration scope? So I think I'd mentioned that early on, trying to make sure we're all on the same page with what the business needs are when we're doing a migration. So the TBDs we've seen, and I'll ask for some other comments here, but what I've seen is that a lot of the times it's focused around what we're going to use for workflow when we're moving from one platform to another, or even the branding, right? There's certain things that aren't going to move from classic to modern if you're in a classic environment still. But making sure we all understand that, because the branding can it can go wild. So trying to put some guardrails around that in your statement of work in the beginning will go a very long way. It's going to make that transition a lot easier. And before we go to this executing migration, John or Charles, you have any comments on that?
Well, there's more that we're actually covering through this slide. Yeah, we're kind of already into the preliminary work. There's stuff that we've mentioned that is actually going to come up in here. No, I think, well, in the TBDs, it's the preliminary assessment. All this work that you're going to do before is going to limit the number of TBDs, or at least identify them so that you can get business stakeholders once again involved to understand, well, what would you like to happen with this? What is what is essential that you can't live without? What can possibly be just modified or changed? Or is there anything that could be left out that would at some point maybe just be rebuilt? But yeah, preliminary work, assessment, discovery, like we have on that slide, is really going to help you identify those things so that you could align and figure out what will need to happen with those.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Scott, that when we have collaboration with the end users, when we're really working together, a lot of times the migration not only goes smoother, it goes faster, right? But that's not the real world all the time, right? Like, not everybody's available for us when it's time. So we have to be flexible, which our team is. And we've done a million of these. So we come with our own uh, knowledge and our own confidence to ask the right questions to move people along. But at the end of the day, it's still the outcomes the end users want that we keep in mind with
Of
each
course.
migration.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, great
Couldn't
point.
agree more.
And as we work through these 6 steps, you mentioned the UAT timing, John. That's sometimes a little bit of a challenge for the end users. They have their daily work they're responsible for. And then when we start adding on a bunch of testing, please go test this, that impacts their workday. So we put those super aggressive migration plans. We can make sure we account for that, because that obviously is very important. So one of the other things we always recommend as well are pilots, proof of concepts. As we step through this, we get into prep and testing. Let's take an example out of one of those deliverables, one of those teams, and let's go forward and push it through the whole process and see how that works, what the user adoption looks like. Did we miss something in the analysis? Are the tools that we anticipated would be the best, are they actually the best for this pilot? And we can make adjustments from there. So that's something else we always recommend as well. So executing the migration, we can talk about this one all day long, Charles. We could spend 3
Yeah.
hours on this one as
Well,
well.
every of the, executing the migration, we trying to kind of split into 6 steps. I've seen people condense those into less or maybe expand into more. Every of one of those steps has different key activities. Like if we go back to preliminary work, we talked about it, but cleanup and organization, get the champions to help you with this. Maybe archive and delete what's not necessary. In the assessment and discovery, we're also talking about, well, talk to your stakeholder, understand what they are looking for. What's the technical analysis? What do you have as technology in there? What content do you have? What are, I'm looking at the list here, security and compliance, customization and tools. You hinted to it earlier, especially with the moving to the cloud, classic to modern is probably the most common scenario I hear from customers and consultants alike. And it's a challenge. Microsoft is now providing that modern experience, which is great, and it's aligning, allowing you to probably get into AI and stuff, but it's not quite compatible with the older ways of working within SharePoint. So what you have to account for this and what kind of transformations will be required. All this customization that's from a third party tool, well, probably won't follow through with any ShareGate has some limitations, but other tools also have. The SharePoint migration tool itself probably has, won't be able to do all of these things because they're from a third party. So you'll have to keep that in mind. And when you go to your planning and strategy development, well, you have to configure stuff at the target before you actually start moving your content. You're going to have to understand what I've mentioned it, information architecture. How do you want to build this? How is it going to be really enable the people who work within this environment? Preparation and testing. Well, that's also part of it, right? ShareGate can't migrate to a tenant that doesn't exist. Your tenant, well, I keep saying ShareGate. Obviously, I'm from ShareGate, but any tool, your tenant needs to exist. Your SharePoint Online, at least administration center, must exist so that tools can actually connect to it and start creating stuff. So there's a lot that happens before you even get to start moving. And then when you start moving, well, yeah, you said it. Do a proof of concept, do a few test migrations to really get the feel of the tool you're using and the outcomes it's generating, because you'll need to understand what the possible errors and warnings, or hopefully just successes that you get through your projects. But still, there will be some reworking to do. There might be some error mitigating, some fixing to do on the source so that you can actually restart, that last migration. And now it's going to work out successfully. And then you count, the incremental copies, because people are working. They're going to continue adding stuff and modifying your documents and changing, items. And you want to limit disruption for your employees and for those end users. Well, there will need to be a first pass and then an incremental, and then say, hey, okay, guys, now it's time to move on and work on the new environment. But even then, you're not finished. You get to the post-migration activities where you need to optimize everything, some testing, make sure all those systems work the way they, you intended that you had planned for. That previous slide was just a very quick summary of those stages, but each of those stages have different key activities, and all of them are really essential.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned one thing before we jump on accelerating migrations. The
Yes.
third-party tools, they all function differently when
Oh,
you're
yeah.
moving to a different platform. Many have adjusted to account for that. We talked about that in the Nintex session, but
Yeah.
all these little pieces that go together that need to be accounted for. So as we gather those requirements and we get our migration plan in place, we have our communication plan. We like to see that executed or in place, implemented by the customer. We have better luck with that. But accelerating the migration. So, this goes back, data is data, whether it's a network drive, it's something coming from a capture conversion. We want to find ways to move this faster. So if we keep all those
Yeah.
rules in place, John, many of our migrations are over 12 months. Sometimes maybe the target's 12 months, but they expand all the time. And we have to make adjustments for that. So multiple workstations. So Charles, just chat about this, expressing this. So when we get everything aligned, getting this to move faster. So a lot of times we have one user license. Maybe it's sitting in a virtual, we're trying to queue up jobs through one single stream, but really it's easier now to do this with multiple workstations than it was in the past.
100%. So yes, you do all those previous preliminary work, all those steps before you actually get to almost the final one, which is the copy or the migration, to streamline everything, make sure it's optimized, make sure you're limiting the scope, and then you get to copy. You could get a one activations license from ShareGate. It works great, and you can leverage PowerShell, do sequential migration, so they run one after the other. This is going to run in batches, and it's still going to perform rather well. Don't get me wrong. But if you want to really accelerate your migrations, our licensing and packaging recently was updated. You can get what's called ShareGate Pro. It gives you 5 activations of that migration tool. Therefore, you can install ShareGate on a server that's tackling maybe a specific file share migration while you install ShareGate on a virtual machine that's going to do your tenant to tenant mailbox migration while you have another one on another server or maybe another VM, anywhere that you have a machine, you can install ShareGate. And this way, you're opening 5 floodgates, let's say, to move content to your target. Doing it separately, though, and making sure that you don't have overlapping operations on each of those machines, so each of them will want to run sequentially, will limit the impact of throttling, because that's a big challenge when you're moving to Microsoft 365. Other platforms too have probably similar, mechanism in place to, to keep the tenant running, in good health. If there's too much activity, it could what's the right word? I guess it could impact the performance of that server. But
Sure.
ShareGate already does everything it can in terms of, of being a tool to do this in terms of decorating traffic and following Microsoft best practices. But we know that there are 3 main factors that will influence throttling. One of them is the machine that's running the operation. The second is the user running the operation. And the third is the tenant itself. Well, you're all moving to the same tenant. You don't really have a lot of control on that one. But those machines and those users, you do have control over. Therefore, getting, we have 6 in here. That's not impossible. You could get a plan that gets you 25 even. But each of them you want to have on a separate machine. And even if it's the same person that's orchestrating those migrations to just be, really fast, well, you want to use a separate account. So your connection to your source could be the same, but your connection to your tenant should be done likely with a service account. That's what we recommend. You don't want your personal account to show up as, the person that modified something or changed or copied items, because it will happen sometimes in migration that the account will show up. So a service account, but 5 different service accounts on 5 different machines will ensure that these levels of throttling or those criteria or factors of throttling are not impacting you.
Exactly. So
Yeah,
we don't want 2 million documents, say, last modified by John Burgess, because everyone's gonna be like, who is John Burgess? And why is he modifying my documents? But
Yes.
that's a great point. And it certainly doesn't reduce the amount of planning that's in place. And actually,
Oh, no.
it creates a little bit more, but that throughput will just change everything. So being able to have
Yeah.
multiple stations running at once, queuing up jobs, definitely a time.
And ideally different workloads. Because if all your
Yeah.
5 migrations are doing the SharePoint migration, it's all the SharePoint services that are going to be taxed by this influx of data. But if one is doing SharePoint, the other one is doing Teams, the other one is doing Mailbox, another for file share, maybe you have a very big project that has all these different workloads to copy. We'll try to dedicate one machine and one account for each of them so that you put all the odds on your side.
Excellent. All right. I'm keeping an eye on our time. I
Yes.
figured we were running a little bit longer on this one, but that's okay. Um, let's see. So we have a couple more items to go through. So first of all, I want to touch base. We mentioned the phrase archiving. Charles, you mentioned it. John, you mentioned it as well. So we do have a session coming up December 4th to talk exactly about that, the ability to segregate some of your data if that's needed. It can be stored in a different environment to reduce what you have in your 365 environment or other platform. So look forward to that. That will be coming up soon as well. Before we go to our next slide, let's see. I'd like to do a takeaway. So when we talk about a takeaway, it's something that you feel was one of the more important items that we talked about in this session. So first on that, John, I'm going to pick on you again for the first one to talk about that.
Yeah, so the theme throughout the whole thing has been planning. You talk about accelerating the migration. Part of that is determined in the planning, the assessment, the analysis. What is the timeline that the organization is looking for? And one of the most important thing is, how do we make it as least disruptive as possible? Charles, you mentioned folks that are in these projects, they actually have other jobs. This is not what they do, migration every day. So I think it's important. I think we do a very good job of, again, coming with just experience and knowledge. M365 isn't new, but it's not old either. So
Right.
there are migrations happening day in and day out. And a lot of folks that aren't even prepared yet to even talk about it. And I think that's where our expertise coming in. But if I had to say one thing, it's planning. And there is a Q&A, by the way, for you, Scott, as well.
Oh, is there? Oh, thank you.
Oh, do.
All right, let's pause for that Q&A.
Yeah.
So
Somebody is asking how. Oh, go ahead, John. Scott. It's your
how to
webinar.
optimize post-migration? Are there some tools available to help to do this? Optimize
Yeah.
post-migration.
Well,
I'm
I'm at ShareGate. I can only, preach for our own. But ShareGate, we signed one of our slides. I mentioned it's our governance tool. So we have something called ShareGate Protect that's going to help you to identify let's say inactive teams and SharePoint sites. It's going to also allow you to identify where you have external sharing, guest access, even internal sharing. There's a new feature coming out actually next week. You're going to hear about it, our Copilot readiness assessment. It's aiming at getting your data ready and aligned for Copilot, because this is highlighting to a lot of companies now maybe some flaws in their security and compliance, and this is going to help you identify these things. So our governance policies for lifecycle management, for provisioning also, actually, that's going to allow you to create Teams templates or SharePoint site templates, so that if people create new resources, they're doing it in the right way, following the guardrails that you have set up. So I'll say that ShareGate is one of those tools that can help you in optimizing everything after the migration to only keep what's relevant and get yourself ready for AIs. Keep an eye out on this, by the way. I'm taking just this quick opportunity next week. If you're a ShareGate customer already, you're going to have something new in there that you're going to want to look out for.
excellent.
A little teaser.
Just a little bit, I know.
Charles, a
But
takeaway for today.
takeaway, well, I kind of have to repeat what John said, and it's funny because I've been hosting what's called As the Expert at ShareGate. I've been doing it for almost 4 years this month, twice a week. I speak with customers, consultants, people using ShareGate, and I think every week we've been saying, you know what, plan, plan, plan. That's how you avoid the bad surprises. That's how you know exactly what to expect. But one thing I maybe want to add is that we didn't quite hint to it in the beginning, but if you want to be successful in your migration project, whether it's you're doing the migration for your organization or you're a consultant doing it for a customer, your outcomes delivery, what are those goals? How will you measure your success? Define this at the beginning so that when you're done, you can look back at it. It's been signed by someone, and you can say, well, I checked off all these boxes. How do you not consider this a success? So that's one way that you can also ensure the success. So plan ahead. It's going to help you optimize and accelerate your migrations. And by planning and getting those stakeholders' feedback on what they're really looking to achieve with the migration, you can also deem it a success.
Great info. I'm going to go with my usual that I always pick. I'm big on the BA, the business analysis, identifying those requirements up front, very similar to what both of you provided on your feedback. Our group on the operations team, we are very focused on the statement of work, make sure we are crystal clear what the needs and expectations are. So that's what we always try to focus on. And that's what we stick on. And that's what we like to live by. We can always make adjustments, but making sure we understand what that deliverable is going to be. I have one more question that came up, Charles. What percent of migrations are hybrid, on-prem and online? So rather than just online, what percent do you see with that?
If I remember correctly, because we had some graphs about this in internal presentations not that long ago, I think that about 85% of migrations happening via ShareGate are moving to the cloud. Most of them, well, I can't remember the exact number, but we can definitely see that now more and more it's tenant to tenant migrations. The move to the cloud, that shift to the cloud has happened. And now with, a lot of companies grow by mergers and acquisitions recently, and that drives a lot of the migrations. But we still have some companies that still stick to the on-premises environment. Subscription edition and SharePoint subscription edition was released, what, a year, 2 years ago? And it's still there. People are moving to it. I heard customers saying, I'm moving from SharePoint 2019 to subscription edition, or I'm still on 2016 or even 2013, and it's about to be completely out of, support. It's considered a legacy system by Microsoft. I need to get out of there, but because they're in specific industry and they have very high, security considerations, they want to be the ones controlling the server. They don't want Microsoft to do that. Even though we know Microsoft security in the cloud is great. It's probably better sometimes than what you can actually do yourself on-prem. But some people are still a bit reluctant. And I'm sorry, I'm not able to give you a specific number, but I know that about 85% of the migrations are to the cloud, at least.
It's a great question. We're seeing a little bit of a bump in the on-prem, nothing significant.
Yeah.
But more inquiries about that. And it's exactly what you're talking about, controlling your data. A little bit cautious with some of the AI tools. They want to make sure that there's some content that is just completely separate. So it was a great question. All right, before we go, our promo. So we have a little bit of a promo. I'm not sure who wants to cover that, John or Charles. It's different for vendors versus end users.
Yeah, well, in short, if you are the customer, the end user, you could get up to 5 extra months to your subscription, depending on the plan and duration you're taking. If you're the person selling it, you could look at the terms and conditions, but you could end up with a free ShareGate license for a year. So there's something there's something for everyone, I guess, in here that is valid until end of this year. So until December 31st.
Great.
I guess reach out to DocPoint. They'll be able to give you all the details.
Yep.
Yeah, we've got resellers as well as customer or potential customers on this call. So certainly
Yes, I know.
Contact us for details because they are a little different for both.
Yeah, make sure we're clear with that. Yeah. All right, everybody. So, hey, thank you for participating in the polls. Purview is a big hit there. That's good to see. And we're kind of split on the migration. So I appreciate your participation there. We may add some more questions on our next session there. So thank you all for your time. on this Wednesday morning. We do appreciate you setting out a couple of 45 minutes or so. Hey, we're right on target for
Pretty good.
here with us. Charles, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your input. Sharing
Oh, thank you for having me.
customer, and John, I appreciate you as well. So all three of us putting this together. It's a lot of work behind the scenes, but I do appreciate everyone's time.
Right on.
Any other questions? Like I said, you do have that document under resources, speakers and documents. Anything else you need, please feel free to reach out and contact us. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.